But today, we're going to be talking about predicting cloud computing sales. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Ensable, what we do is we monitor business customer relationships. And the purpose of the monitoring is we're trying to determine when those companies are about to buy technology services. And the way we do that is we look at past sales of technology and look at public data points that have preceded those sales in the past. And that's how we're able to predict that. And so we have a massive scraping system that's trying to uncover those electronic smoke signals and data points that are essentially taking place before the sale to help you predict when your business relationships are about to purchase technology to be proactive with them. And the reason why I mentioned that, not to put out a commercial, but essentially to kind of give you some background about how we were able to come up with the data points to help you predict when your customers and prospects are buying cloud computing sales. And what we've found is there's 7 main events or conditions that typically precede a cloud computing sale. And we're going to go into each of these in more depth, but I just want to list them out here. The first of which is expanding data center footprints. The second is slow servers, shared servers, private data centers, application development or new product launches, mergers, or end of contracts. And what we're going to do is as we walk through each of these, we're going to talk to you how you can gain access to this because, again, all of this information is public. It's just a matter of getting access to it. If you're an Ensable member, you won't necessarily have to go through each of these websites to find this information. This is what we do for you. But if you're not an Ensable member, we still want to make sure that you have access to this so that you can help predict when your customers are buying cloud computing services. So in order to predict expanding cloud data center footprints, what we're looking at is subnets and IP addresses. This is basically an indication of how large that data center footprint is and how rapidly it's growing. And so what we've done is we've compiled a list of the top 1 million companies that are experiencing expansions within this realm and provide that for you for free. If you go to ensable.com/cloud with a capital C, you'll be able to download that Excel spreadsheet. This is updated on a daily basis, so you can kind of run through it and compare it. But the idea here is to look at companies that are experiencing growth within the subnet and IP address realm. The next is looking at slow servers. And again, a lot of these data points are focused on web servers. I know that a lot of companies have other data center presence, but this is the window that we have into their data center network and options. And so if we look at different resources like tools.pingdom.com, we can measure the performance of their web servers and their public servers, whether it's their email or their website servers. This will give us an indication of how well these are performing. And a lot of times these servers are sitting on top of or shared with other resources within the company. And so if anything above 15 seconds is typically something that would be fixed in the near future. And so that's something you want to be proactive with. There's another great website called YouGetSignal, and it has a lot of different tools. One of the tools that I really like is it helps you determine how many companies are using that same server. We know that there's a lot of different hybrid clouds and public clouds and private clouds. But what this does is it helps you look at the actual server itself and determine how many other companies are actually using that same server from a web-based standpoint. And so typically as companies grow, they tend to move on from these lower-end type platforms. And so you can identify companies that are sitting inside of these shared servers, and typically this is going to be something that's going to be transitioned into something that's a little bit more professional. And so when you enter the website of the companies, it'll tell you how many other companies are using that same server on this site. Next, there's a tool which Ensable provides, which is the Upsell Report. We run analytics on their web servers, and one of the analytics that we pull out is, are they sitting inside of a traditional data center, like a colo space, like an Amazon, or have they set up their own private data center? And so we know that there's been a big shift from private data centers to traditional data centers. but there's still quite a few companies out there that are using private data centers. And so the Upsell Report can help you identify not only their technology and locations, but it also can let you know whether or not they're using a private data center. Another indication that we found that predicts when companies are buying technology in terms of cloud computing is development. And companies are already always hiring development individuals for application and things like that. So sometimes it's hard to differentiate between churn and growth. But if you keep a close eye on this activity using Google Alerts, you can predict when these new big projects are taking place, which typically have cloud computing needs tied to them, by looking at the development jobs taking place. And so a lot of data center reps will use these types of tools and say, look, this company's just hired 15 developers. Chances are there's some type of massive new product launch or application development that's going to need a data center presence. And so this allows you to get early on in that conversation about where they're going to host this new application that they're planning on developing. Also, mergers usually create a new environment where they'll reassess their data center services, since there will be two different companies coming together. There's a lot of mergers taking place these days, but if you go to crunchbase.com, it'll allow you to keep track of those mergers, and you can oftentimes talk to those companies about the new consolidation strategy for their data center services. Another tool that I really like is DNSTrails.com. What this does is it gives you historical data on the company's data center presence. It lets you know how long they've been in those contracts on average, where they've been, where they're going, and when those contracts will likely end. And so what they're doing is they're monitoring those changes taking place within the DNS records, which is essentially what Ensable does as well, but in different formats. But it allows you to basically look at those dates and say, look, that contract's coming up on such and such a date, because it's probably a 2 to 3 year contract. So it looks like they switch data centers about every 3 years, and so this is probably the time that we need to engage with this company. So that's all of the 7 events or conditions that you usually want to look for when predicting cloud computing sales. And you can run into any of those websites to basically look at your current customers and relationships to help determine that. But there's also another important component, which is why companies move from one data center to the next. And if you can understand this, this will help you build a much better case study. So essentially what you're trying to do is you're trying to understand why they chose a specific data center to host their services. Once you can understand that why and find other companies who have the same types of conditions as this company, it'll be much easier to sell these services. Because essentially what you're doing is you're creating case studies even if you haven't sold the opportunities yet. So a lot of folks who don't have a lot of experience selling this, or maybe have had a lot of experience, but they just don't necessarily know why, really understanding that will make the whole dialogue with future customers and prospects much easier. So sometimes there may be a specific application, or maybe it's because the data center is local, or maybe it's a specific support model, or maybe it's something else. But if you can understand that why, it'll make the sales process much easier. And what we'll be talking about on our next call is some data analytics that Ensable has been building for the past year around data centers and different technologies. And so what we've done is we've analyzed every data center across the country and their clients and tried to compile data points that helps you understand what those clients have in common. So this is an example of the report, but this will be a free data analytics tool that we're putting out there that we'll talk about on the next call. But what you're looking at here is for a specific data center in a specific market, these are the most common types of content management applications that they're using. This is the location counts that they have. These are the CRMs that they use. These are the most recent events that these companies have experienced. These are the most common applications that these companies are using. So ultimately what this does is it helps you better understand what's unique about the companies that are using the data center, and do any of those unique attributes that they have indicate future opportunities with other customers. So again, we'll go into more in depth about this tool on the next call, but we just wanted to help you understand that in connection to today's dialogue, which is understanding what's happening before companies are buying cloud computing, but what are the reasons why they're doing that is the more important question. But after this call, we're actually going to have a guest speaker, David Hoffeld, who's really the subject matter expert on the science of selling. And he'll be joining us on June 8th to kind of do a follow-up on a lot of these data analytics tools. And we'll be talking about some proven scientific methods for customer acquisitions and what he's discovered in a lot of the experiments that he's been running. So make sure that you join us for that. And that's really everything we had for today.